I'm Carly Krakow, and we're thrilled to have Noura Erakat on Live with ASI today. She is a human rights attorney, legal scholar, co-editor of Jadalia, and assistant professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome, Noura.
Hey, Carly, thanks for having me.
A new report was published this week by Forensic Architecture in collaboration with Al-Haq, which provides detailed evidence surrounding the extrajudicial execution of Ahmad Erekat by Israeli occupation forces. And my deepest condolences, first of all, to you and the entire Erekat family. Again, Noura. As the report states, at 26 years old, Ahmed was shot after his car crashed into a booth at the container checkpoint between Jerusalem and Bethlehem and the occupied West Bank. And this was shortly before his sister's wedding. There is an 18-minute video that goes with this report. It was narrated by Angela Davis. It is really shocking and difficult, but important for everyone to watch. And could you just begin, Noura, by telling us more about the context of this report, how it came about, and why it is so significant that people do go check this out and watch this video?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's the point. Watch the video. On June 23rd, when Ahmed was literally running errands for her sister's wedding later that evening, he lost control of his car, veered into the kiosk where there were 4 Israeli officers. One of them fell to the floor and immediately got up, indicating that there wasn't much harm. And then 2 other officers shot him 6 times above the waist in a span of 2 seconds, right? Then they leave him out on the pavement. We see him writhing in video that's available. Do not offer medical help. We know that a Palestinian ambulance was also turned away, that the Israeli ambulance didn't care for him. And his father, who learned about this incident, who came to the scene, was denied access to him as well. Ahmed was declared by the state immediately as a terrorist who deliberately tried to ram his car into the kiosk in an operation to kill these police officers. And that was the end of the story. There was no investigation, not an Israeli investigation, not an international investigation of the incident. There was no investigation of the car, of possible mechanical malfunction. There was no autopsy conducted on his body. There was no review of the videotapes. There was no interview with the witnesses. There was nothing. It was enough for Israel to say that he was a terrorist, right? For that to be the end of the story, and for us to believe that Palestinians are all guilty until proven innocent. In our moment of, obviously, for those who for Palestinians, okay, just say generally for Palestinians, I was going to say for those who study Israel's use of force, but beyond those, even if you don't study this, right, and you don't understand how Israel has expanded its use of force, both in the occupied in the West Bank, as well as in the Gaza Strip, in the course of Israel's war on the besieged population in Gaza, as well as its use of open live fire on the protesters during the Great March of Return. Even if you don't study that, and as a Palestinian, you understand that this is a common story. And in fact, it's been found by a number of international organizations and UN bodies that Israel has an incredibly liberal use of force, and oftentimes use that force on mere suspicion or as a precautionary measure, literally as a precautionary measure. Yet, when we were in response to this, of course, Israel also now wants to punish the family as a form of collective punishment by withholding Ahmed's body. It's been 8 months and counting that they have not been able to mourn him or to bury him. His mother is still in disbelief, still is not convinced that he's dead. This is the kind of cruelty that's involved. And yet at the same time that we are trying to demand accountability, you have a barrage of just really spiteful, I would say, racist people who are insisting that Ahmed was a terrorist and that he deserved to be killed in that way. And I want to emphasize here that, you know, for anyone to believe that, let's say Ahmed did want to conduct an operation, but to believe that he was going to conduct that operation on the day of his big sister's wedding and break his entire family's heart, ruin his sister's wedding. He's engaged to be married at the end of the summer. Break his fiance's heart. To believe that he hates Israel more than he loves his family, right, is at its very core dehumanizing and incredibly racist. But of course, we're fighting against an incredibly powerful country, and have, try the family. We tried, we worked tirelessly in the summer to advocate for the release of his body in a modicum of accountability at the UN Human Rights Council, through media campaigns, through petitions launched to divest from, and boycott Tel Aviv University, where the Greensburg Forensic Institute is, that's holding Ahmad's body. I organized my family across 3 states in the US to lobby their senators to act on their behalf as voters and taxpayers to intervene to get the body back. I mean, we do everything we can. Let's put it that way. We do everything we can. And yet in response, the policy, Israel doubles down and basically establishes that it's not going to ever release the body. It wants to exchange the bodies it's holding on to. Ahmed is one of 70. In exchange for the body of 2 soldiers held by Hamas in Gaza. Now, I also point out here another, the slight of dehumanization, which is to equate the exchange of soldiers' bodies and soldiers who are trained to kill and are prepared to be killed, right? And who went to Gaza to do that, versus civilians who are trying to decorate their car for a wedding. Right, the collapse between the distinction of civilian and combatant is significant here. Forensic architecture and Al-Haq together take what available footage there is, take available video, use shadow analysis, use 3D imaging, consult with experts, right, to reconstruct the events and conclude with the findings that you referenced earlier, which basically, they conclude 4 major things. Number 1, and most significantly, there's no indication that Ahmed accelerated his car. He was going at about 9 miles per hour. And if anything, the expert, the analyst thinks that he might have tried to pump the brakes at the end. I hate sharing this, I just want to say, because I feel like it's obvious, but for what it's worth, here's the scientific investigation to tell you what we should already know. The second is that he was refused medical assistance. The Israeli ambulance that came and left, and his body was unmoved and untouched. Right. The third was that his body was treated in a degrading way. It was left out on that pavement, and then it was stripped naked without a tarp over him. Eventually there was a tarp placed over him. The Israelis insist that this is common procedure in order to make sure that there's no booby trap or explosives, except you can see in the video, the soldiers are smoking cigarettes and casually hanging out. They are not worried that Ahmed's body is booby trapped. And then the fourth finding, also obvious to us, is that his hands were above his head and he was trying to take a step back. There was no indication that this young man was an assailant. And so the significance of this is that it's a direct refutation of Israel's narrative. It's also significant because there's so little work that the deprivation of Palestinian bodies is of Palestinians is so endemic and characteristic of life, of Palestinian life, that there are no investigations. There's no demands for investigations of this sort with this kind of precision. Obviously, there's human rights documentation, but with this kind of precision. And it's really what every Palestinian life merits. In our case, our advocacy, together with its exposure and the availability, right, of the video that was available, we're one of the few fortunate families that gets to be vindicated in this way, to tell us what we already knew. And I want to just highlight, Carly, that despite these findings, I am still being assailed by trolls who could care less what the investigation said and still say that Ahmed deserved to be killed like that.
Oh, thank you, Noura, for that really powerful and comprehensive summary that you hit on all the major points of the report, and the video really, even for those who have been following this issue, for those who do know the facts, it really just meticulously outlines the evidence in such a powerful way. And you can just see all this shocking reality laid out. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously, the return of Ahmed's body is one of the foremost
Is the priority.
priorities, the priority. And then as you said, this is not the only case. The matter of extrajudicial execution and the matter of withholding Palestinian bodies and not returning people to their families. Tragically, this is extremely common in occupied Palestine. So I just, to mention another example among many, we can recall the murder of Iyad Al-Haq, a 31-year-old disabled man who was unarmed and was shot when walking to his school for people with disabilities. So I wonder if you could conclude just by commenting on the wider context here of these killings, how startlingly widespread they are in Palestine, and perhaps touch on all the work you do regarding solidarity across struggles and parallels with racism and police brutality and killings here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I touched on that a little bit as I was discussing, what is the work that's being done. One of the things that I do is to actually study Israel's use of force in the language of law, and how the state, the political state, as well as its military branches, have expanded and retooled the laws of peacetime and law enforcement, together with the laws of war, basically to expand Israel's available use of force and to justify the killings of a greater number of Palestinians. The short of it is that what they do in law is shrink the category of who counts as a Palestinian civilian, which makes even more Palestinians, it renders and transforms them into legitimate targets. So when we see, for example, Israel in the course of 51 days killed 2,100 Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip, including 534 children, it's not that they negate those numbers. It's not that they say that they're not civilians. It's that, or explicitly, it's that they say that they are no longer responsible for them. And they're now perverted proportionality assessment, in kind of a law of war approach to proportionality assessment, have concluded that Israel's use of force was proportionate to the harm caused, right? Either by rendering them the responsibility of Hamas, who they contest use them as human shields, or by saying that they are direct participants in hostilities because of political membership in a group, and by increasing the value of their soldiers' lives, Israeli soldiers' lives, in what's known as force protection, that then justifies the greater number of killing of other Palestinians. So it's not, right? It's not just this outcome of, which it also is, the dehumanization of Palestinians, which makes the taking of this life so easy, right? It's not just that. It's also very much embedded into the rules of Israeli military and police engagement. And it's been justified, which creates for Israel a level of impunity in the international sphere, who then can't condemn Israel outright, because Israel comes back and says, this is legal and this is why it's legal, right? So what does this have to do? This summer, when this was happening, I very much, I think everyone should, as a matter of morality, right? I support Black liberation. And I hope, in what I do, I contribute to the advancement of that cause. And along with everyone else this summer who is concerned, was very much tried to be a supporter of the what I considered Black uprisings, and another incident, largest incident of it in recent history, of any civil rights uprising in the United States in recent history. It was in the course of those uprisings that Ahmad was shot and killed. And the way that his life was taken, right? The ease with which it was taken, the impunity, and then the victim blaming that was associated with it is so resonant with the taking of life of Black people and the spectacle of that violence that we've been witnessing, right? From Ahmaud Arbery this summer to Breonna Taylor, and obviously, and tragically, George Floyd, but also well before that, Philando Castile, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, right? By vigilantes and law enforcement, that there was a call from sympathetic folks to make that parallel. Right. And a lot of Palestinians saw it immediately. That's what they saw. And protests in Palestine, right, held up, images of Iyad Al-Haq and George Floyd, because that parallel could not be denied. And I declined to do that. I declined to do that for fear that we can be inadvertently taking away attention from you know, a moment. There's so little ever attention to Black uprising, right? And so here you're going to take away from this one moment inadvertently, right? It didn't come organically from Black movement. Had it come organically from Black movement that articulated and named this as part of a transnational struggle against, you know, imperialism and US colonialism, that would have been different. But for me to do it, the risk was high. And the other reason is, and as I've said before, there is risk in the flatness of an analogy. This wasn't about analogy. This wasn't about sameness. This was about the nature of the struggle. And what I tend to think about is, how does Black Palestinian solidarity as an anti-imperial analytic help illuminate for us the racist dimensions of Israeli domination and the colonial dimensions of US anti-Black domination? And so on that count, you know, what about the Black liberation struggle is also anti-colonial in its nature? And here, you know, it's the work of Black scholars, of Black radical thinkers, of Black activists that have highlighted for us, right? It's the 1951 Civil Rights Commission submission to the United Nations charging the United States with genocide of Black people that identifies the killing of Black people and the systematic nature of it, first through, you know, the lynching, vigilante lynching of Black populations as a form of enforcing racial domination and racial caste, not to be confused with the book, which there's significant critique of, but that, you know, first in the impunity with which that's done, and then, you know, how the modern rope is the policeman's bullet, as the document says, the invocation of an international human rights framework to make that case, the continuity of that kind of killing, the fact that it happens for the sake of maintaining and protecting white supremacy, right, is what then, you know, should force us to think about, is the Black liberation struggle a struggle for a more perfect United States, or is it in fact an anti-colonial struggle, an anti-imperial struggle that seeks to address US colonialism within its borders, which we see very plainly in the ongoing territorial expansion and removal of native nations, as well as in the US's exploits? What is integration into a more perfect United States if it continues its domination, its war making, its extraction, its imperial exploits abroad? And so I lean in, so to speak, into that tradition and that work to emphasize that this now solidarity is not about the sameness, but it's about, you know, addressing those conditions that produce, you know, what some scholars would call the social death of Palestinians and American Blacks. And so,
Thank you, Noura. Yeah, no, that's really powerful. I think adding a lot of nuance and necessary complexity to these important points around which there's a lot of interest, but which need that subtle approach to kind of point out those distinctions, and really appreciate you going into that. But thank you so much, Noura. I mean, there's always so much that could be said. There is a lot to unpack here, but we're thrilled you could be here. And unfortunately, it's under very tragic circumstances that this report came about, but we hope people continue to read this, to watch the video, and to really understand what unfolded here. And we'll have all the links available for those who are just, you know, waiting to take another look at more of your work and read your book, Justice for Some, and we'll have all those links available as well.
and
We
mostly
appreciate
the forensic architecture video. I think read that, share it with you know, interlocutors who can also impact a decision, whether it be an elected representative or otherwise, or a UN body or an organizational body or part of your BDS campaign or what have you. Please do, I think, at the in Ahmad's memory, continue to advocate for a free Palestine.